hopefully you took the challenge of working through this Nearpod, kind of playing with it before you're watching this video. And that's something that sometimes we'll do with our learners is have them dive in to content before we start to help them find. It's kind of referred to as that productive, struggle. So as you dove in, you might have noticed that it took you to the opportunity to meet me through a video in a flip, and that was located here, but also the chance to provide your own recorded introduction of you sharing who you are, why you've chosen this. And I have used this flip in my classroom, especially when we were remote, to get student feedback. And sometimes my shy students really were able to contribute when their voice didn't have to be out loud in the public forum, yet here it still was in that public forum. I do share with you then a little bit about videos. And one thing to be aware of, and as we look at this video, you'll see it, is that throughout this video, there were some interactives. And as we played, you noticed that immediately you got a question which you had to answer before you could move on. Even if you're not using technology like this, when you play a video, start out with a question for your students. Give them some look fors during the video. Pause a video, even if it's a YouTube clip, to help connect them to their learning. Now, you might have noticed that that video was designed so you couldn't skip over parts and you had to answer the questions. And I bring you to this important answer here about that social media, that technology, and that connection. The fact that, very often we have to feel like we have to respond. Please set boundaries for yourself when it comes to your communication, whatever way you're communicating with students in the future. Let them know just because you have email, the Remind app, whatever it is that you're communicating with those students, Google Classroom and its alerts, Schoology. You don't have to respond right away. Boundaries are incredibly important when it comes to all the technology around us. As you continued on your journey, you'll realize that you got to a collaborate board. And in the collaborative resources section of your website that came with this lesson, you'll get to see some of those answers. But notice that something you might have used in class, you've heard of being used, just getting you to think about some of those tech tools. That's why I wanted you to play this video after you'd had the experience yourself. Notice because I didn't submit a response, it gave me that alert. That's one of those controls that sometimes you can set in your educational technology. There is a slide, or there was a slide in the resources that allowed you to access this PDF file. So if you are someone who, handwritten notes are helpful for you, available to you was this graphic that you would have the opportunity to print out, because we're going to touch on some things that maybe you choose to record as I go through this part of the presentation. And so I know that you are able to read. You're college students. And if you weren't able to read, there's actually a tool in Nearpod called the Immersive Reader. And I share that because meeting our students' needs is so critical and so important. And technology lets us do that. And anytime you see kind of a book with a speaker, it means there's an immersive reading tool. And so here we go. I will not play this whole thing for you, but notice how we can support our students with technology. And like I said, I'm not going to go through all of that. But you'll notice that there are so many ed tech tools out there. And here on this slide, I name only a few. Some of them you might have listed as you were doing your brainstorm, sharing what you have used. Notice I didn't use and list the very common Google Classroom or Schoology or Canvas, which are different learning management systems that people use. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because what I want you to spend time doing in terms of with class is actually looking at some of the links that I've provided to some of these tools and kind of playing and thinking about where you might see them used and how you might see them used. Speaking of use, the money aspect is something so important to us in educational technology as teachers. And if you're choosing to record on that notes page, there's the little tech cost that I used. But free sometimes has limits. And when I started using Wakelet, it was entirely free. It now is a paid version. Freemium. Some features will need a subscription to be used, and then paid, there's various costs and various features. And that is always something to consider as an educator is what tools are going to give you, quote, the most bang for your buck, or how can you use those free tools to your benefit. I strongly encourage you when entering a school system, reach out and say, what subscriptions does the school district have that we are able to make use of? Um, then I did have an open ended question for you in that Nearpod that got you thinking about paper, using paper. And as you can see, I gave you that opportunity to print something off. And, there's a couple reasons that you would be mixing paper and technology. I wear the hat of facilitator of instructional technology in my school district, as well as being the agriculture teacher. I use a lot of paper and manipulatives with my students along with that technology. As we look here, handwritten notes really help students process the information. I will watch a video with my students and model writing notes on the board. I will use an interactive Nearpod such as this and actually show them, hey, I might record this. Or as I shared with you in the example, oh, notice there's this icon here. Another great way to mix paper and tech is if they are planning to create an infographic. If they're planning to create something with marketing, sometimes that hand done sketch before they go to the computer tool really helps facilitate that. And I have found a lot for my students that data collection for labs get messy. Having that paper data and hoping they don't lose it allows them, to not worry about their technology tools and their devices and spilling chemicals, spilling soil, but really lets them use that paper. And then their results might get typed later. They might get graphed later. And so there's that key to mixing. As you look, you have another graphic. If you chose to print it out, there's a check mark where I said, check the sites at school. Planning a lesson at home is great. Having it actually work at school is a critical check that needs to be done before the students walk into the classroom. This includes videos. This includes gamified learning sites. Almost anything you're using, I strongly encourage you, check the sites at the school, make sure it's working, and always have a plan B, have a backup plan. What are you going to do if the internet goes out that day? If the power goes down? If you have students who their Chromebooks are not charged, even though you're supposed to have Chromebooks, charged every day in a one-to-one setting. So make sure that somewhere in the back of your mind, there's always that plan B when you're using technology. And really, especially as beginning educators, for yourself as well as for your students, start small. Choose 1 to 3 tools that you are going to use. And maybe it's, hey, I'm going to focus on Flip so they can record and share supervised agricultural experience related opportunities. And they start to use that. And then maybe you branch out to using something like Formative. And I use that as an example. It's got a free version that has some perks. But by starting small, it lets you get skilled in a technology area, lets you get skilled with a tool, but it also doesn't overwhelm your students. And the last thing that you had in your interactive Nearpod was a reflection tool. Having a close with your students is critical. Kind of thinking about what they've learned, some sort of snapshot caption. And I did this just so you could see what a close might look like. Again, notice if you try to go forward without taking action, it is going to have that oops for you. If you didn't do this already, I will share with you that there's tools on the bottom. You can type in a text box. You can hand write your images. You could add another image of it. So just be aware that that exists. As the teacher, I do see these reports when I share something through this. The last tool that was here was a link to the Wakelet, which has the variety of the tech tools that I kind of shared out with you in general. And so I strongly encourage you, click through a few of these, see how maybe you can see yourself using them. And I didn't cover every single tech tool out there. I don't use every single tech tool out there. The last thing that was in this presentation was credits. Digital citizenship, that example as a teacher, means giving credit where credit is due. I used a Slides Mania template. I wouldn't have needed to include this fonts component, but the fact that I used their template, I, as an educator who wants to be sure I'm modeling to my students good digital citizenship, I leave that credit slide in there. If I pull a graphic from somewhere, I don't pull something that has a copyright over it and use it, because when it comes to using tech, I need to be, a model and an example for my students. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you click through the web page that hopefully was provided for you as the starting point for this lesson. Explore some of the links that are there. Revisit the Flipgrid and maybe get to know something about your classmates that you didn't know. And feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have.